Should we get started?
Okay.
So welcome to today's session of our Imagine seminars. This is our last session before the summer break. And just want to inform you that we'll be resuming these talks on September 9th. Today we have the great pleasure to have Boris Thibert from Université Grenoble-Alpes. Boris is an expert on numerical geometry and particularly numerical optimal transport, convex integration, and geometric inference. And his talk today is about inverse problems in non-imaging optics, which is somewhat paradoxical for an imaging seminar, but anyway. As always, questions are welcome at the end of the talk. Just send your questions through the chat and we'll unmute your microphones at the end of the talk. So without further ado, Boris, the floor is yours.
Okay, so thanks a lot. Thanks, Eric, for the introduction, and thanks to all the organizers for giving the opportunity to speak. Okay, so I'm going to speak today about inverse problems in non-imaging optics. Okay, and this work involves some colleagues. So mainly Quentin Mérigot, who is a professor in Orsay in Paris, and Jocelyn Méron, who was our PhD students around that subject. Okay, so before starting, I'm going to mention what is the goal of non-imaging optics. Okay, so you see the full screen? Because, okay, it should be okay. So the goal is to design some optical components such as mirrors or lenses that transfer a source light to a given target light. Okay, so for instance, here on the left, you see here where the mouse is, you have a collimated source light, meaning that it's the rays are parallel. It's as if it was the sun. So here we have the sun, and the light is going through this piece of plastic. So it's a lens. And after it produces this image on the wall, which is a Japanese character. Okay. On the other side, okay. So there is a light, which, I mean, I don't see my the whole PDF file, but whatever. Okay, so there is the same light, which is going to touch the mirror and then being reflected onto that image on the wall. So the lens and the mirror as designed so that they get the desired target image on the wall. Okay, so actually there are a bunch of motivations and potential applications, and I came to this field almost 10 years ago because a French company, Optis, contacted us to design some headlights. And they wanted to do that as automatically as possible. Okay, and the idea is to design the shape of a mirror that is going to reflect the light and send it where we want on the road, and to avoid to light a driver that would come in the other way. And there are also other potential applications which I did not investigate. So I was speaking, and I'm speaking about non-imaging optics, and it has to put in contrast with imaging optics. So in imaging optics, we are given a one-to-one map, F, from a source space X to a target space Y. Okay, so for instance, here I have X and Y, and I have this one-to-one bijection. And the goal of imaging optics is to build a surface, for instance, which is a mirror, that is going to reflect X onto Y while preserving the bijection. Okay? In a sense, if you think of glasses, when someone is wearing some glasses, the idea is to transform a shape which is in front of the body onto the eye, but you want to keep more or less a kind of bijection. You don't want to transform too much a guy that would stand in front of you. Okay, so it's more imaging optics. In contrast with that, non-imaging optics, we are not given any more one-to-one correspondence. Okay, so we have two intensity of lights. So X here, for instance, it could be a square, and the light is emitted from a square. and you have, why not, a uniform intensity of light. It's constant. And the target, it's given, you have another measure, nu. And the idea is to build a surface that is also going to reflect mu to nu using Snell's law of reflection in that case. But the main difference with the previous problem is that you are not given any bijection in advance, even though you will obtain at the end a bijection. Okay, so I'm going to present 4 different inverse problems. So the first one is that we have a collimated source light, think that you have the sun here, and all the rays are vertical in this example, and emitted from a plane. So we have an input source light. We have also a desired target light at infinity. When I say at infinity, I mean that we want to, in certain directions, seen as point on the sphere, we have a measure of intensity which is desired. And the goal is to define the shape of the mirror that is going to send the source light to the target light. So we can do the same thing, and there is a similar structure with lenses. Here, the collimated source light is going through a lens, which is planar and horizontal on that part. And then you design the shape of the upper part so that it concentrates the light exactly where we want it to be. I will also consider a third case, which is the point source light. So instead of having the sun, imagine that you have a light emitted from a point, and it potentially emits light in all the directions. Okay, so we can look for mirrors. And in that case, we can also be interested in building lenses. So actually, I will give a common framework to these 4 problems. And in each of them, I will provide 2 solutions. Roughly speaking, either the components are convex or concave. Okay, and there are two solutions. Okay, so this is the outline of my talk, and I want to mention briefly the design, the construction of the mirror, so in 2 cases. And we will see actually that there is a common structure which is common to the one of optimal transport. So after that, I will speak a little bit about semi-discrete optimal transport. Okay, first problem. So this is a point source light. Okay, so suppose that you have a light which is located at O, and that emits potentially light in all the directions. So a direction can be seen as a point on the sphere, which is centered in O. And actually, you have a measure of intensity of light. Okay, so we have a point. And on a sphere centered in this point, we have a measure of intensity of light. This is the source light. For the target light, we only want to target directions. A direction is seen as a point on the sphere. So I have also a sphere, a unit sphere. And I have a measure, nu, that is modeling the intensity of light at infinity. So the goal is to find a surface, R, which is going to send mu to nu using Snell's law of reflection. Okay, so we can assume that R is parameterized by the length, okay, by the radial distance. So if you denote the length between the point on the surface and the origin, okay, so we can parameterize R by x times u of x, where u of x is just a distance. So it's not restrictive at all because we want every ray from a source light to touch the surface. We also have the Snell's law. The Snell's law tells you that x is sent to y, and you just have that the incident angle equals the refracted angle. That's all. And here we have a scalar product. Okay, so what does it mean that mu is sent to nu? Just that the map T, when you can push the measure mu to the measure nu. It just means that if you take any Borelian on the sphere here, the measure of that Borelian is equal to the measure of this pre-image. We just say we want to keep the amount of light from the source space to the target space. So now, if we assume that the 2 measures are absolutely continuous, so we have density functions, f and g, then using a change of variable, we end up with this equation. Okay, so here we have a map T that involves the differential of T and T involves here N, which is the normal to the surface, and N obviously depends on the gradient of U, okay, where U is the radial distance. So when we plug all this, we end up with this Monge-Ampère type equation on the sphere. Okay, so the first line is the preservation of the mass, and T depends on N, and N depends on the gradient of U. So more or less, you have a determinant of something that involves the second derivatives of U. Okay, I don't speak more about the other conditions and this equation. So except that it has been well studied in the 90s. So the first results of existence for weak solutions are due to Caffarelli and Oelikar. And after some strong solutions and regularity. And actually what is nice is that the proof of existence of weak solutions of Caffarelli and Oelikar is based on a particular discretization of this problem. And that's the one I'm going to consider. Okay, so I'm considering again this problem. Okay, I have my source light located at O. And also I have a measure on a sphere centered at O. Okay, but now I suppose that I just want to target one direction, Y1. Okay, I don't want to light in all the directions. In that case, there is a very simple solution. It's just a paraboloid of direction Y1 and of focal point O. Like this, all the rays that are emitted from O are targeted Y1. Okay, so this solves the problem. If we want to light in only one direction, there is a very simple solution. So now if instead of one solution, I have n solutions or n equals 3, for example, in the picture, the idea is to do the same thing, is to consider a mirror made of pieces of paraboloids. Okay, if I have 3 paraboloids, I have 3 directions, I will have 3 paraboloids. They all have the same focal point, which is the light. And P1 is targeting Y1, P2, Y2, and P3, Y3. And if we see the paraboloids as convex bodies in 3D, three-dimensional shapes, then we can say the surface will be the boundary of the intersections of the paraboloids. It just means that, for example, if I'm going through the blue ray here, I will touch P3, then P2, then P1. I keep P3 because it's the first one that I'm going to touch. Okay, and it's going to be refracted into Y3. And I'm doing the same thing with the other directions. Okay, so like this, in this example, I have a mirror made of 3 pieces of paraboloids. Okay, so I have these 3 pieces, and I can project each piece, for example, P3, radially onto the sphere. And I have what we call the visibility cell V3. This visibility cell means, in fact, all the rays that are coming from O and that belongs to this cell are refracted to the direction Y3. So what is the amount of light received in Y3? It's just the measure of the visibility cell V3. Okay? And now the equation that we want to solve is that we want that this measure, we want it to be equal to something which was prescribed in advance. So when I have a paraboloid, it depends on the focal point, which is fixed, it's O. The focal the direction, which is given, it's Y1 or Y2 or Y3. And there is only one parameter left, which is the focal distance, kappa 1, kappa n. So it's the only parameter 3. So the problem now amounts to find a set of focal distances, kappa 1, kappa n, such that the measure of each visibility cell is exactly what we want it to be. Imagine, for example, that Y3 receives too much light, then you increase the focal distance of P3 and it will disappear a little bit behind P2, okay? And you might expect a better result. Okay, so there is a lemma due to Caffarelli and Oelikar that tells us that the visibility cell have this form. And actually the proof is so simple that I'm just going to show it quickly. Each paraboloid, Pi, can be parameterized in radial coordinates, okay, by this formula. And so when you have a given X, it belongs to a visibility cell if the radial distance in the direction X is less than the radial distance for every J, for the other paraboloids. And since we want to linearize the problem like this, we take the logarithm. Okay, and it's done, the proof is done. The thing is that the fact of having a visibility cell that looks like this makes a connection to with optimal transport, and it corresponds to the C superdifferential in the theory of optimal transport. Okay, so at least we see that we have an optimal transport problem on the sphere. It means that we have to solve this equation where the visibility cells are of this form. Okay, so the lemma was known in '94, but the connection with optimal transports was done 10 years later by Wang of this problem. Okay, so I'm going to present a little bit more briefly another example, the mirror when we have a collimated source light and not point source light, and we'll have the exact same structure. Okay, so here, this time I have a light emitted. For example, it's the sun here, which is below us, and all the waves are parallel and over a domain omega of the plane. We can see it as coming from a plane if you want. So we have a source light, mu, a target light, nu, always at infinity. And the goal is to find a surface, R, which is going to send mu to nu, similarly as before. Again, we can assume that there is an elevation function, u, okay, that parameterizes our surface. The Snell's law tells us that every vertical ray is refracted into a direction, and the direction depends on the normal to the surface, and the normal depends on the gradient. So it's a function, f, of the gradient of u at x. Okay, we write now that we want to preserve the measure. So we write the definition. We make a small change of variables. And if we assume that we are in the continuous case, so we have measures with densities, then we end up with a Monge-Ampère equation in the plane. And I, again, don't speak about other conditions and boundary conditions, but we have to find a function u that satisfies this second order equation. Okay, and again, that's not the way we are going to solve and look at the problem. Okay, so in that case, we consider the semi-discrete case, meaning that the source light is represented by a measure mu, which is absolutely continuous. And the target light is discrete. We can discretize if it was continuous. In this example, for example, we have 16 directions in the target. Consider the direction yi here in red. So if I have a vertical input ray, and that I want to be refracted into yi, I don't have the choice. I have only one normal possible for the surface. So it's quite natural to choose a plane whose slope is fixed, pi, and it depends on yi. Okay, and we say, okay, if I want to target yi, I'm going to consider a plane of slope pi. And I also have the elevation of the plane, which is encoded here by the real number psi I. Okay, what is the amount of light received in the direction yi? It's just you project vertically the green plane onto the horizontal plane, and you have the visibility cells. Every ray coming from this cell, the visibility cell vi, is going to be refracted in yi. So now I can, yes, I have a choice to make, and I choose to take, so a surface made of pieces of planes, and I take the upper envelope of the planes, meaning that if I have above x, I just keep the plane which is above all the other planes. So it's a choice that we choose to make. And now I can state my problem. So in the direction yi, the amount of light is mu of vi, the measure of this visibility cell. We want it to be equal to nu I. And the only parameter left that we have, since the slope is fixed, is just the elevations. So the problem amounts to find a set of elevations, psi I, psi n, such that the measure of each visibility cell is exactly what we want it to be. Okay, and here we don't have to do any calculation, but the visibility cells are of the same form than before. And this tells us that we have also an optimal transport problem in the plane. Okay, so let's go briefly to the optimal transport side. And okay, so very briefly, so you probably all of you saw it several times. So the most problem is, so you have two spaces, X and Y, with two probability measures, mu and nu, and a cost function, C, that tells you how much it costs to go from a point X, small x, to a point small y in Y. So you could take the square distance, the distance, or any function. So most problems amounts to find a map from X to Y, which is going to preserve the mass. Okay, you want the measure of A to be equal to the measure of its pre-image. And you also want it to minimize the total cost. So given a T, you look at the cost between X and T of X, and you sum over all the particles of X. Okay, so as you probably know, this problem, I mean, there is a nice relaxation due to Kantorovich. Okay, and instead of looking at maps, we can look at the transport plan. And it just allows you briefly to split the points. And it's a probability measure on the product space, but the thing is that you are allowed to split the mass. Whatever. From a numerical point of view, most problem or the Kantorovich problem, we can divide it, why not, in three kinds of techniques. First one is that if we consider that both the source measure and the target measures are discrete, in that case, thanks to the relaxation, we have a linear program, okay? And so there is a famous auction algorithm. And if you consider the relaxation with the entropic regularization, there is the well-used and well-known Sinkorn algorithm. Second case, we can consider that the two measures are absolutely continuous. And as we saw before with the two optical problems, you end up with PDEs. And here you can find, you could use Benhamou-Brenier formulation, and otherwise there are, for Monge-Ampère equations, stencil methods to discretize these continuous equations. And I will focus on a third case, which is the semi-discrete case, meaning that the source is continuous in the sense that there is a measure which is absolutely continuous, and the target is discrete. It could be a discretization of something continuous, whatever, but I consider that my data are given by this. So mainly the first algorithms around that were more coordinate-wise increment with Olyker-Prusner type algorithms. And more recently, there was Casey-Newton and also Newton method, and I'm going to speak about that to solve the problem in that case. Okay, so semi-discrete optimal transport. Showing it again. So you have a space X. You can take a domain in RD if you want. And you have a probability measures with density rho. And the target space is discrete. And you have a discrete probability measures on it. You have a cost function as always in optimal transport. What is a transport map? It's a map from X to Y. And you want it to preserve the measure, meaning that the measure of all the points that are sent to Y1, let's say, is equal to nu1. Okay, so in a sense, when you have a map under reasonable assumptions, it gives a partition of the source space, and the measure of each cell is the measure of the target point. So you have a transport map, and the most problem amounts to minimize the total cost among transport maps. Okay, a nice metaphor, economic metaphor can be given with Becker's problem. So here, suppose that X is a town like Grenoble, why not? And that you have a density of population. So rho, the density function, is the density of population. Here you see that there are more people in downtown than in the neighborhood. And you have a set of bakeries. And the cost is the distance or the square distance in that case. Okay, so what do people do usually? They go to the closest bakery to buy their bread. And this naturally divides the town into several quarters, and each quarter is a Voronoi cell. Okay, this cell here, all the points, all the guys living in that cell are going to the closest bakery, which is that one. So this works if the price of the bread is uniform. So look at the cell in the middle. The density of population is huge and many people go to the same bakery. So there might be not enough bread in that bakery. So the interest of the baker is to increase the price of the bread so that less people will come, but he will make more money as long as he's selling all the bread. Okay, so the interest of the baker is to increase a little bit the price of the bread. If you are living somewhere, you want to make a compromise, okay? And if we assume, so there is an assumption here that the compromise is linear in between the distance and the cost of the bread, then we end up with Laguerre cells, meaning that if I live somewhere, I want to minimize the cost of walking plus the price of the bread. Okay, and it amounts to shift the hyperplanes that are in between two Voronoi cells or now Laguerre cells. Okay, and actually we can show that if we consider the map tip psi, that if X is in a Laguerre cell, associates the bakery associated to this Laguerre cell. Okay, I mean it associates the bakery where your interest is to go. And if I say, okay, the measure of the bakery will be just the integral of the Laguerre cell. If so, the map T is by definition a transport map between rho and that new measure that depends on psi, but it's also an optimal transport map with a quadratic cost. Okay, so in a sense, what we want to do in the optimal transport is to do the reverse. We are given a source measure or a density rho and a target measure nu, and we want to find a vector such that the measure of each Laguerre cell is exactly what we want it to be. In other words, we want to find the prices of the bread such that each baker has exactly the right amount of customers that come to the bakery. And you see that there is the same structure as before in the optical problems. Okay, so actually to solve this problem, we can show that finding an optimal transport map that amounts to find a set of prices of bread with the economic metaphor amounts to maximizing a concave function which is given by phi here, which we call the Kantorovich functional. So this result was due in the quadratic case to Orenhammer, Hoffman, and Aronoff. And actually, it's a very direct consequence of Kantorovich duality in the optimal transport theory. So the gradient of this functional is just a vector, and it's just the measure of each Laguerre cell minus nu I. And nu I is the measure of the target measure at yi. Okay, so actually this equation here can be seen as a discrete Monge-Ampère equation. Because if everything was continuous, we would have had a Monge-Ampère equation. Okay, so there is the classical Holliker-Prusner algorithm, which amounts to change bakeries after bakeries, the price of the bread. It's a coordinate-wise increment algorithm, which is certified, but whose complexity is quite high. And I will, so more recent methods, first there were quasi-Newton methods with no analysis, but that were working well, and more recently Newton method, for which we have convergence results. Okay, so I'm going to speak about Newton algorithm. So the equation that we want to solve, I recall it, so you think of the town and the bakery metaphor. We have a set of bakeries, and we want to find the price of the bread, so a vector of prices of the bread, psi, such that the measure of each Laguerre cell is exactly something which is fixed. So we say, okay, we define a map G from Rn to Rn, and it's just to a given vector of prices. It's just the measure of each Laguerre cells that are associated to it. And the equation we want to solve is just to find psi, such a vector, that solves G of psi equals nu. So a first remark is that G is invariant by addition of a constant vector. I mean, think of the bakeries. If every baker is increasing the price of the bread of €1, since he was in Grenoble, then the Laguerre cells do not change. So the measure of the Laguerre cells do not change, and G remains constant. Okay, so this is because in the Laguerre cell, it was linear in the price of the bread. It was plus psi. Okay, so G is constant in one direction. So the naive Newton algorithm would just be to, okay, start with an initial vector. I'm not going to speak about that now. And then at every iteration, calculate a descent direction, decay, which so has to satisfy this equation. And we add also the fact that the average of decay is equal to 0. This is because since it's invariant by addition of a vector, we have to fix something, and we fix the average to be equal to 0. So this is the Newton algorithm, and it works. The convergence is only local, in the sense that if psi0 is close enough to a solution to the problem, then we can show that it converges. Okay, so we are going actually a little bit further, and we propose a damped Newton algorithm that is going to take into account the global convergence. Okay, so the equation is always that one, G of psi equals nu. And we have an admissible domain. The admissible domain is just the set of vector of prices such that the measure of each Laguerre cells is more than a given epsilon. In other words, we want some customers, at least epsilon, in every bakery. Okay? And the damped Newton algorithm works as follows. It's the Newton algorithm, except that at each iteration, we choose a parameter tau, which is in between 0 and 1. And tau is chosen, so you take it as large as possible, so as to ensure that you stay in the admissible domain. So we don't want empty Laguerre cells. And you also want to control the way the error is going to be decreased. Okay, and we can show actually that if J is smooth enough, as in the classical Newton algorithm, and if you have some strict monotonicity condition, then the damped Newton algorithm converges globally. So here, since J is the differential of the Kantorovich functional, the gradient of the Kantorovich functional, this is the Hessian of the Kantorovich functional. Okay, so in a sense, you want to show that it's strictly concave. I told you that J is constant. Yes, in the if I add a constant vector 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, then it doesn't change J. So yes, G. Sorry, it doesn't change G. So the differential here, you have to consider it on the orthogonal of a set of constant functions. That's why it appears here. So in order to show that this algorithm converges, we have to show smoothness and motonicity properties on the map G. I just want to give ideas on how it works. If we look at the partial derivatives of G, they are given by these formulas, and actually if you derive GI with respect to the price of the bread of the neighbor, it's going to be an integral over the interface, like IJ. So the idea is just like this. GI of psi is just the measure of this cell here in gray. So if you look at this difference, so here we just change a little bit the price of YJ. It's going to change a little bit the cell, and the difference between GI and GI at psi is just given by an integral over this small set in gray. And when epsilon tends to 0, it tends to an integral here over the segment. Okay, so roughly speaking, that's the idea of why we have such a formula. So as for classical Newton algorithm, we want some continuity or regularity. And here we look at the continuity of the partial derivatives. So I just told you that the partial derivative of GI with respect to Pj is an integral over this segment. So in this configuration, if I move the price of the bakery here and also the one of that bakery, I diminish them as the same way, then it's going to change the Laguerre-Cell. And you see that the integral is right now continuous, but suddenly it's going to disappear because the two opposite faces touch at the same time. Okay, I can do it again, but the green segment is not continuous when we change continuously the prices. So it means that we don't have a function G which is of class C1. Actually, this problem is due either, for example, to the fact that the points here are aligned. If they were not aligned, this would have not happened. So if we are in a generic setting, it's okay. And also it happens because the measure of Laguerre-Cell was going to 0. Okay, if we still have mass everywhere, it doesn't happen that way. Okay, so this tells you that we need, for example, genericity conditions to have assumptions. Okay, so now for the strict monotonicity, here I have partial derivatives. And as I told before, it's an integral over the interface. And I can take the dual of these Laguerre-Cells, okay? And it gives here a graph H. The dual is a graph in red. For example, in between these 2 points, I put an H. Why? Because the integral over the interface in between the two Laguerre-Cells is strictly positive. And actually, it means that the Laguerre-Cells is non-empty and it intersects the support of the measure. So under some connectedness assumption on the support of ρ, the measure, we can show that H is connected. And if so, some classical arguments show you that the kernel of L is reduced to the vector 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. And this allows to show that G is strictly monotonic in this way. Okay, but in the orthogonal of a set of constant function, the eigenvalues are strictly negative. So that's why we require some connectedness assumptions on the support of ρ. Okay, so this is the kind of theorem that we get. So here under some convexity assumptions and connectedness of a source measure, we show that there is a global global linear convergence and that the rate is quadratic even locally. Okay, this results also so on Riemannian manifold when the cos satisfies the Math-Rüdinger-1 condition, and also with less assumptions, but with genericity conditions when we work on domains in RD. Okay, so some numerics. So here, think that the town is a square, that the density is uniform, the density of population, and that all the bakeries are in this corner. Okay, and that every baker has the same amount of bread. Here, the measure is uniform. So if we look at the Voronoi cells or the Laguerre cells, but when the prices are all the same, this is what we have. And we see, for example, that this cell here is very huge. So many people will come and it doesn't have enough bread. So after a first iteration of a Newton algorithm, we have this. So we see that the cell converges quite quickly. And after 3 iterations, we are very close to the solutions. Okay, so even here, I mean, there are not many points. Okay, I agree, but the bakeries were located in a corner, and the convergence is quite fast. So our algorithm can handle densities that vanish. Okay, so here I have another example. And so it's a piecewise linear density that vanishes inside this small square. And even though we see that this is the evolution of the Laguerre cells along the Newton iterations, and with 8 iterations, it converges, I mean, visually, it looks coherent, but it converges very quickly. So, and the computational cost seems to be linear in the number of Diracs of the target measure. Another thing is that, so by using solvers, either with PS-dot done in Python or Geogram, which is done by Bruno Levy, by using, I mean, with even 10 to the 7 points that discretize the target measure, the problem is solved to the numeric, to the machine error in 17 iterations. So it converges very, very quickly. And the number of iterations in the Newton method is very low in practice. But each iteration can cost a lot to be calculated. Okay, so let me go back now to the problems in optics. Okay, so we have a Newton scheme, and we need to calculate descent direction which is best. And for this, actually, we need to calculate integrals of the visibility cells or Laguerre cells, or the integrals over the interfaces. And the main difficulty in the computation and in this algorithm from a practical point of view is the computation of the visibility cells and the boundary. And actually, so I don't know if you are aware of that, but there is the notion of power diagram. Power diagram, it's similar diagram. You have some points in R3 and some weights. And if the weights are all equal, it's the Voronoi cells. And if the weights are not equal to one another, then you end up with power cells. So it gives a partition of the space into convex polyhedron. And the good thing is that there are some efficient algorithms from computational geometry that allow to compute them in a robust way. And what we showed is that if I'm looking at the mirror point source light problem, I have visibility cells on the sphere. We can show that the visibility cells on the spheres are obtained by intersecting power cells in 3D with the unit sphere. And since these power cells are efficiently computed, this gives a way to compute the visibility cells efficiently in our framework. Okay, let's show you some results. So here I have a point source light. Okay, it's not a bulb like this, but imagine that it's punctual, that the bulb is very small. Mu, we take it uniform on half the sphere. And nu is a discretization of the cameraman, the image. And this is the results that we obtain. At the end of the minimization process on the sphere or half the sphere, we have a bunch of Laguerre cells or visibility cells that are obtained as intersecting power cells with the unit sphere. Over each Laguerre cell, since I have a focal distance, I have a piece of paraboloid, and this gives a parametrization of a surface, which is my mirror. This is a triangulation in the middle of my mirror. And on the left, this is a rendering done with LuxRender. Okay, so we put a light in the middle. We simulate the trajectory of the light with the ray tracer LuxRender, and it creates this image on a sphere, on a wall. I mean, there is some technical detail, but it creates exactly what we were expecting. Okay, so it solves the problem perfectly. Here, I do the same, but this time it's not a point source light, but a collimated source light. The target image is that one. And I told you that the visibility cells look like this, and actually they can also be obtained as intersecting power cells in 3D with the plane. And at the end of our algorithm, here on the left, you have the set of Laguerre cells. Above that, you have surface made of pieces of planes. Okay, this mirror is convex. This is a triangulation of the mirror. And when we do the rendering with LuxRender, it's what we obtain. So here, actually, we can see many things. For example, the cameraman is black. And it translates to the fact that on the image, you have a singularity. It's of class C0 and not C1 at the limit, if you want. Just means that the light is going to be put on one side of the cameraman and suddenly on the other side. So black zones on the target image corresponds to singularity, C1 singularity, if you want, on the geometry of the mirror. Okay, actually, it works for collimated or point source light, and it works for lenses or mirrors. There is a similar framework, and in all the cases, we have that the visibility cells are obtained by intersecting power cells with either the sphere or the plane. So we have only one program, one software that can solve all these problems at once. Okay, briefly, what I mentioned is that we deal with the far field problem, meaning that we have a measure at infinity. Okay, we target directions. So imagine that I have 3 lenses here, and I target 3 times the same image, the cameraman. Then here I render, I have the 3 lenses here, and you see that there is a shift in the 3 rendered image. Why? Because the shift is related to the size of each lens. So in practice, it's people want to do that to design several components that target the same image. But if we target directions, it doesn't work and the image is fuzzy, which makes sense. So that's why we need to target points instead of images. So there is a nice heuristic that works quite well, actually, which is the following. So imagine that I have your collimated source light. You have points that you want to target, and you want to build a lens here, which is more or less centered in the origin, O. So you see every point in the target has a direction, since you have a fixed the origin. And so you have direction, you can solve the optimal transport problem with that. And you end up with a solution here, a mirror, a lens in that case. But you see that all the rays that are going here are going to the direction yi, but yi is missing zi. Okay, it's not really in front. Nonetheless, we say, okay, we take the barycenter and we define a new vector yi, which is the point that we would like to target minus the barycenter of the cell. And with this new set of directions, I can solve again the optimal transport problem of the problem in the far field case. And I end up with a second solution and I can iterate. And actually, that's the convergence of the algorithm on one example. This is the target image. After one optimal transport step, we end up with a solution, and this is the image that we obtain, the rendering obtained on a wall. And with the second iteration, it works very well. And actually, we never go beyond 5 iterations because this algorithm converges very, very quickly in practice in all the examples we did. Okay, so the same an image of the train with 9 pillows. Okay, and it's not too fuzzy in between because we solve well the problem. And even if there is an obstacle in between the lenses and the wall, you still see the image of the train because it only affects, some of the lenses, but not all of them. Okay, briefly, we can do the same thing. We decompose an image color into the red, green, and blue channel. And we solve 3 times the problems. And the colors can be added for each pixel if you want. And we can get like this an image. So this is done always by doing ray tracing with LuxRender. Okay, we also built some components in so plexiglass or aluminum. So plexiglass for lenses and aluminum for mirrors. Yes, and I mean, the artifacts and so on are due to the fact that it's due to the quality of the drilling, actually. Okay, and we also had to, I mean, smooth the surfaces ourselves by hand, and hopefully thanks to the convexity of the component, of course, it disturbs the quality of reflection or refraction, but it still gives reasonable results. Okay, and I mean, it's quite robust. Even if we move, it's supposed to focus at 2 meters, but even if we are at 1.5 meters, 1 meter or 50 centimeters, we still see the shape. And this is probably, most probably due to the convexity of our shape. Okay, so more or less, wanted to say that if we look at the problems that we do have, we end up with not so easy Monge-Ampère equation, and that geometric discretization, which is the semi-discrete discretization, amounts to put that into a framework which is quite reasonable, and a Newton algorithm converges very quickly. So using this discretization, we can solve several Monge-Ampère equations, and actually different problems arising in optics. And what I showed is that also the iterative procedure allows to deal with non-optimal transport problem, but more realistic targets, and it works very, very efficiently. So, and right now we're still working on things like this. So to generalize to generated Jacobian equations, so they correspond to Monge-Ampère equations which are not related to optimal transports problem. Okay, and actually it works directly, but the implementation is a bit different. And we also consider problems that are less well posed with extended source light. What I showed was working with collimated source light or point source light. But what happens if you have a bulb which have some thickness? Okay, and in that case, it's more heuristic that we are developing. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. Eric, your microphone is muted.
Okay, I was thanking Boris for a very interesting talk, and I was apologizing because we didn't realize that we were competing with SIAM Imaging Science Conference that is being held this week. So that should explain the poor attendance that we had, which we're very sorry for, because your talk was quite interesting, Boris. So since we're in small committee, questions are welcome, and we have a few minutes to chat with Boris before 5. So please, if you have any questions, go ahead.
So maybe while people are deciding whether they want to ask a question or not, let me ask you a question, Boris. Okay. This is very interesting work. Have you considered the situation where you are, instead of having a surface, you are changing the index of refraction of the lens material?
Okay, you think for the lens and the index might change
yes.
inside the material?
Yeah.
No. Yeah. No, not at all. I haven't looked at it, not at all. And I think that in that case, yet the problem is quite, different, and probably you have to look at geodesics that depends on the index in the material. I haven't thought about that, and the framework that I presented surely does not apply to that setting.
Right, because you don't have you're not looking for a transport in some sense, right? You're not looking for
probably looking for, yes, I don't know how to state it, but yes, you would have probably to look at geodesics that depends on the index. And
yeah, it's an area that some electrical engineers are looking into. They call it graded refractive index material, I think GRIN or something like this. And they're trying to create flat lenses basically by changing the material property inside.
Okay, so there are some meta surfaces. I mean, it's not related to that, but I know there are some flat materials, and I don't know how it works, but the idea is that you can define something like a phase or a function on the plane, the flat material, and this function encodes has some optical properties which I don't know. Mm-hmm. And I know some people working on that, and in some cases, they also end up with optimal transport problems.
Okay, interesting. Thank you.
But it's not what you said. I mean, but at least they have flat materials, and I know that there is a phase function which is I don't know what, mm-hmm. and I don't know the optical meaning at all. But that in some cases they end up with also optimal transport problems to be solved.
Cool, very nice. Thank you.
So I'm looking at the questions, but I have one too, actually. Boris, when you replace the image by a pointwise approximation, so the target image, do you have to take special care in how you choose this approximation?
Not really. I mean, the good thing is to choose. So for example, I mean, it's good if, let's say, the Wasserstein distance between the continuous measure, the absolutely continuous measure, and the discrete one is small. So what you can do is just you put point more or less everywhere and take, for example, the Voronoi cells. You can do also Lloyd algorithm to put them more or less everywhere. And if you say, okay, I have points, I have Voronoi cells, if the Voronoi cells are small, then this guarantees that the Wasserstein distance will be small and it will work. I mean, that's not the problem at all. And actually what is quite interesting is that when Holliker and Caffarelli found the first weak solutions to the equations, that's what they did. Okay. They said, okay, we take a discretization of target measure, then we do the stuff with the supported paraboloids. And after, the convergence part is very, very easy and straightforward. That's not the difficult part.
And can you also include constraints on, say, for instance, manufacturing constraints on the size of the smallest piece of paraboloid, for instance?
So the thing, when we have optimal transport, we have an equation. And if I say I want an object which is convex or concave, when you enforce that condition, it becomes an optimal transport problem. And with such a constraint, there is uniqueness of the solution.
Okay.
At least when it's far field. And it's true, but not that clear in the near field case. So if you enforce convexity, you don't have any freedom, in a sense. But if you don't enforce that, that's also things that we are looking right now. You don't have a well-posed problem to be solved anymore, but with some heuristic, you can try to, let's say that you have a component, you have an image which is not the one that you want. So you calculate an error between what you have and what you want. And if you have a gradient with respect of the parameters of the surface, then you can, by using heuristic, try to incorporate over designed conditions.
I see.
And actually, we have results that work quite well, but it's more heuristic.
Okay.
So, yes, and you are not anymore in this nice framework of optimal transport.
Okay. Looking at the time, any other questions? Well, if not, Boris, thank you so much again. And again, we apologize for this the fact that events have been competing and we were not aware of that. In any case, You gave a great talk. It was a nice way to end this this season of our seminar, and so thank you all for following us. And we'll resume this series of talk in September. So have a great summer.
Okay.